Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Children's Grand Rounds this morning. We're happy to have you here with us. Just a few announcements before we get started this morning. A reminder that you will be muted with your video camera off as you join us this morning. We do invite you to join us for questions, however, and you can use the chat feature for this, which is located at the bottom of your screen. There's a dialog bubble you can click on for that. We also would appreciate it if you would take a few moments at the end of the evaluation or at the end of the presentation to complete an evaluation for us. This should pop up as soon as you close out WebEx. If you could please direct your questions when you put them in to all panelists, that will make sure that I can see them this morning so I can help moderate Q&A with our guest speaker. For those of you who are looking for educational credit for today's presentation, we will automatically send you a certificate of attendance if you have been online for 45 minutes or longer. If you happen to have missed any previous Grand Rounds, they'll be available in our virtual Grand Rounds library online. Some of them are also available through our StarNet site, and you can find them by clicking on Help for Health Professionals. If you would like a calendar appointment for future Grand Rounds, please email us at the email shown on your screen, and we'll be sure to make sure that you don't miss a future Grand Rounds. I want to invite you to join us next week on July 23rd for COVID-19 clinical guidelines, what you need to know to care for pediatric patients. We will be joined by Dr. Gabby Hester, who is our Medical Director of Clinical Outcomes, and she will be reviewing the summary of all of the care guidelines that we currently have in place at Children's for the care of COVID or suspected COVID patients. So we'll be summarizing all of that next week, so please join us for that. Before I introduce our guest speaker this morning, I do want to take a moment to thank our Children's Minnesota Foundation for their partnership in today's talk. I also want to take a moment to welcome some donors who've joined us for today's conversation. And thanks to the partnership with our foundation, we will be able to host our guest speaker, Julie King, for an additional 30 minutes of question and answer after the Grand Rounds presentation. We're excited to have our donors joining us for that, and we would invite anyone who is on and available, current or future donors, supporters of Children's Minnesota, to please join us after the presentation for an extended 30-minute Q&A if you would like. So feel free to stay on and join us for that. And now it is my pleasure to welcome our guest speaker this morning, Julie King. Julie King is co-author with Joanna Faber of the best-selling book, How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen, a survival guide to life with children ages 2 to 7, which has been translated into 22 languages. She and Joanna also collaborated on the companion app, Pocket Parent. Julie leads workshops in person and online, consults with parents of children ages 2 to teens by phone and video, and speaks publicly to parents, caregivers, and school groups across the United States and internationally. Julie and her husband live in the San Francisco Bay Area, which means she's joining us very early from there this morning, where they are visited now and then by their 3 grown children. You can visit her website at www.julieking.org. We're delighted to have Julie King with us this morning to give us the perspective of how we can support parents during this time, particularly with the pandemic and looking ahead into the fall. So welcome, Julie, and we're delighted to have you here this morning.
Thank you very much. And just testing, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let me tell you my plan for the hour. I'm going to talk to you about some of the communication tools from the book that I wrote, How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen. And I'm going to apply it also for kids who are older than little at this point. I'm not going to assume that you've read the book or that you have forgotten some of it. So I'll be talking about how kids might be reacting to the pandemic and how we can respond and how to engage our kids' cooperation now that a lot of us are living with them 24/7 or a lot more than we used to be. I'm not great at reading and talking at the same time, but I really want to encourage you to share helpful ideas that you have for each other in the chat. And also, if you ask questions, I might not catch them, but I know Angela's watching, and I will be doing a Q&A at the last part of the hour. So if I don't get to your questions during my talk, you'll have a chance to ask questions at the end. So by way of introduction, if you would all enter into the chat the ages of your kids, just so I have some idea of who is on the call today. And I'll let you know that I also have 3 children. They are 29, 26, and 22. And as Angela said, I'm speaking to you from Northern California, just north of San Francisco, and I'm interested to know what are the ages of the children, of your children, or the children who you work with. 7 and 3, 5 and 8. Oh, we have a lot of young ones. 11 and 6, 28 and 30. 7, 4 and 2, 5, 18. Okay. We have a very wide range here. Let's see. 7, 11, 15. Okay, so we have some teenagers also. Good. So I will use some teen examples as well. And we also have some little ones. Okay, well, we have it looks like we have quite a range. And obviously, different age kids have very different needs and you have different situations. Okay, let me start off by acknowledging how hard this is for parents. My sample size might be biased given who I work with, but I'm hearing from everyone that they've lost it with their kids at one point or another, because we weren't meant to care for kids like this. I'm not here to add to your guilt. I don't have a magic bullet for this situation, but I can offer you some suggestions that may make life easier during shelter in place. When people hear that I've written a book called How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen, they often say to me, I want that. I want my kids to listen. And what they mean is, I want my kids to behave, right? Do what I say, at least some of the time. So the first big idea I want to talk to you about is that there's a connection between how kids feel and how they behave. In fact, we can make that statement more generally. There's a connection between how people feel and how people behave. If you think about those moments in your own life as a parent, when you're glad that you didn't accidentally leave the Zoom camera on live when you're with your kids, and you know what I'm talking about. It's those moments when you said something nasty or mean or yelled at them a bit loud. When does that happen? It's often when we ourselves are stressed. It's when maybe we're under pressure from work, or we had an argument with our partner, or we're just tired of hearing kids whining and crying or crawling on us, and we feel like we can't take it anymore. So it's true for us as adults, and it's true for our kids also. If we want them to behave well, they're more likely to behave when they feel okay. So how can we help them feel better? Well, the simple answer is that one thing we can do is to accept their feelings. And it sounds so simple when I say it that way, but it can be very hard to do in the moment. Well, it tends to be easy when when the kids are having positive feelings. When your child says, I love my baby brother, right? We say, oh, that's so nice. I'm so glad to hear it. But if your child says, I hate my baby brother, what do we want to say? No, you don't. You were having such a good time with him just a minute ago. He can't help knocking over your block tower. He's just a baby. And we don't say hate. When our kids have negative feelings, when they're unhappy or frustrated or disappointed or upset, we want to fix it, right? We want to make it better, or we want to explain to them so they'll feel better. But this can backfire. To them, it feels like we aren't understanding them or that we don't care about them and their feelings. But I don't want to just ask you to take my word for this. I want to do a very brief exercise along the styles of something I do in my workshops with parents. So you could get the experience of what it feels like to have your feelings denied or being spoken to in some of the common ways that we speak to kids. In order to do this exercise, you have to imagine that you had a very rough day with your kids. Now, some of you have recently had a day like this, so you can just think back to how tight did your stomach clench or your jaw, or how loud did you yell? What did it feel like? But for those of you who don't have one handy, I brought one for you. So I want you to imagine that you've been working from home under deadline with a work project, and your kids keep interrupting you when you have to get on the phone with a client. Your kids start fighting and making a racket. They're grabbing the mouse when you're trying to write an email. It's just the whole day is like this. It's one frustration after another. After your kids are finally in bed, a friend calls to ask how you're doing, and you confess you are so fed up. You don't feel like you can take it anymore. So imagine if your friend responds, hey, remember how much you always wanted kids? This is just part of the deal. You shouldn't let it get to you. And you should feel grateful that you have a job. How would you feel? What would be your gut reaction? There's no right or wrong answer. Type into the chat a word or two that would capture your feeling, not what you would say out loud, but how you would feel if your friend said this to you. Let's see what your responses are. done, okay? Belittled, annoyed, not validated, unaware, resignation, frustrated, guilty, embarrassed, ashamed, more frustration. Is anybody angry at me? The comment is a good reality check. So for somebody, it was really actually very helpful. Disregarded, angry, annoyed. Okay, so these are all very common reactions that people have when their feelings are denied, right? Um, and if you think about it, most of these are not the reactions that we want our kids to have to us. If you had found this comment helpful, you're more likely to say something like this to your kids, but they might not have the same reaction to it, to this kind of statement that you did, and they might feel embarrassed, ashamed, frustrated, angry, annoyed, guilty, as people have reported. So here's the harder question. Do we say things to our kids that will sound to them like we're denying their feelings? Or maybe we don't say these things, but what do people say to kids that might sound to the children like we're denying their feelings? Can you think of anything that you've heard come out of an adult's mouth, yours or somebody else's? I brought a few in case you don't have one by, of your own. Um, it's not such a big deal, honey. Right. Or as Rebecca said, oh, you're okay. That's not a nice thing to say. Yeah. Yeah. Stop whining. Get over it. You guys are good. You're getting it. um, just get along. Right. Um, that's not true. You're lovely. Or what about this one? Calm down. Right. My sister once said this to me, and I immediately escalated. If you think I should be calm, then you don't understand the seriousness of the situation. And I totally escalated because I thought it's worth not being calm about. And if you think I should calm down, you don't understand. So I need to convince you. So if you've ever said something like this to a child and they escalate, that's why. Here's another thing that I got from a parent. But you like macaroni and cheese. This is just a different shaped pasta. It tastes exactly like macaroni. Can you imagine a child who has told you they're not eating it and you try to convince them? How likely is it that they're going to say, "Oh, I didn't realize. Okay, thanks. Thanks for pointing that out." Or here's, imagine a child says, complains about the color of their cup, and we say to them, "What difference does it make if you drink from a blue cup or a yellow cup?" That's our perspective as an adult, right? But for a kid, it can feel like it really matters. So what can we say instead? We might try, "Ugh, that's not what you wanted. To you, the wrong color cup makes you not want to drink milk at all." Right? And even if we don't have the quote unquote right color cup, it helps first to acknowledge how important this is to your child. It makes it easier for them to accept an alternative when we accept their disappointment first. Or have you ever said this? "How can you be bored? We have so many toys in this house." Right? Can you hear how that is also a denial of feelings? So instead, what might we say? "Ugh, nothing looks interesting to you right now. Even though we have toys all over the house, you're just not in the mood for any of them." Don't rush this part of the conversation. Let them tell you more about their boredom. Then you can help them move on. I wonder what kind of mood you are in. Doing something physical, like biking or a dance party, or doing something maybe sitting at the table, like drawing, maybe a puzzle? Or do you want to do something alone, or are you more in the mood to do something with somebody else, inside or outside? So we can help them move on once we have accepted their feelings first. Or for an older child, um, we might want to say to them, "How can you say your life is ruined? You have so much to be grateful for. A place to live, plenty of food. You don't know how lucky you are," right? How likely is an unhappy teen to say, "Oh, that's a good point. I take it back. My life isn't ruined." Well, so what can we say instead that would show that we understand? We might say, "Oh, this whole shelter in place has really destroyed what you like most about summer. You can't go camping with your cousins, the basketball courts are closed, and even just hanging out with friends isn't the same when you're not in person." So again, even if we can't give them what they want or fix the problem, it helps first to acknowledge how important this is to your child. It's easier for them to accept an alternative when we accept their disappointment. I want to go back to that phone call with the friend. at the end of the day. And instead of denying your feelings, she's going to ask you a series of questions. And again, notice how it makes you feel. Um, Imagine she says to you, do you make a daily plan for your kids so they know what they're supposed to be doing? Do you make sure to take regular breaks so you can check on them? Well, why don't you tell your kids that when you're working, you are not to be interrupted? And why haven't you put in for a little vacation time? Again, what's your immediate reaction? In the chat, let us know. Not what you would say out loud necessarily, but how do these questions make you feel? Overwhelmed, guilt, defensive, annoyed. I cover my ears. Yeah, like a failure. Again, these are common reactions. You have no idea. I feel criticized. All I was doing was asking questions. But again, we feel like we're being judged, right? It can make us defensive. Ooh, somebody says this sounds like your mother. Apparently, that's not a compliment. So what do we say to kids that feels like this? Well, I brought you a few examples. Why did you do that? Why didn't you stop when you were supposed to? And that's not really a question, right? Why are you making such a big deal about this? Um, so instead of, a lot of us ask questions sometimes because we want to just find out what happened. We want to be helpful, but to a child, it can feel like an interrogation. So if a child is crying, we want to say, well, honey, why are you crying? Why? But we can take that question and we can turn it into a statement. Oh, you're crying. Can you hear how that is an invitation for the child to share with us if they're ready about what's going on? But it doesn't feel like a demand the way a question does. Or even a question like, what happened? Can be difficult for a child to answer, either because they don't have the self-awareness or the language to tell us in the moment, or they're worried that they're going to get in trouble, or they don't have a good reason for what happened. So instead of asking, we can just make a statement. Oh, something happened. Again, it's an invitation for kids to tell us when they're ready. But watch your why questions, questions that start with the word why, because they can be especially insidious. Why did you make such a mess? Right? They're not really questions at all. Why don't you? Why did you? Okay. Let me go back one more time to the friend on the phone call. And this time she's going to give you some advice and let me know, how does this make you feel? You know what you should do? You should put a sign on the door that says, do not enter unless it's a dire emergency. And then make sure you really enforce it so they learn. Do you like my advice? Was that helpful? What is your reaction to advice? But actually think about this. So somebody says it might be helpful. Somebody else says it makes me feel like she doesn't understand the issue. That will never work. You don't understand. So sometimes we hear advice and it's helpful, and oftentimes it depends on who's giving the advice and what our relationship is and whether we're open to it. But a lot of times people will tell me it's bad advice. I wasn't asking for advice anyway. I was just venting. You should keep it to yourself. So we have to be careful about how we offer advice in general and to our kids specifically. So what do we say to kids that will sound like advice? It's when we start off with those words, you should, right? You should get out the magnet tiles. You always like playing with those, right? We're trying to tell them what to do, give them advice, or just ignore your brother. He's only doing that to get your attention. So if you're an advice giver, just be sensitive that sometimes kids are not open to, they're not ready for advice. They weren't asking for it. So one more time back with your friend on the phone, what is it that we want to hear from her? What if she said to you, ugh, this working from home thing is just impossible sometimes. You feel like you can never do anything well. Half the time you have to neglect the kids and you still can't get enough peace to focus on work. Maybe what we need is a big storm to shut down work altogether for a day so we could just get a break from all the craziness. How do you like the empathic response? Do you feel what I'm going for is validated, right? Okay, so what I'm going for is that you feel like I get it. I know what you're going through. That I'm putting it towards how you're feeling, so you know I was really listening. And several people are saying I felt much better. Right. So this is what we can do first. We could, to help our kids with difficult feelings is to acknowledge those feelings, to put them into words. Um, but what are those feelings? Well, I want to invite you to think about how your children's behavior has changed since this pandemic started. What have you been noticing? What's different? Especially, what are some of the challenges? Um, Enter into the chat because I think when I've done this talk quite a few times now since the pandemic started, and it's been helpful for parents to think about what they're seeing in the frame of this is in part a reaction to this situation and the shelter in place and pandemic. So some kids are having a very hard time. Some kids are doing okay, but some kids are having a very hard time. And if you think about it, their routine has been massively disturbed. A lot of kids miss school, even the older kids who sort of complained about it before. They miss playing with their friends. They're, they miss their activities and their nannies and their grandparents. They often pick up on our stress and anxiety also. So they may be acting out. They may be defying you more, breaking the rules, quick to anger. Um, they might have become more argumentative. And then I'm also hearing about a lot of younger kids who, or children in general, who have regressed. So the younger ones are having potty accidents. I'm hearing about baby talk. Does anybody have that going on in your house? A lot of sleep disturbances. And then some children are more withdrawn or clingy or whining and crying more. Yeah, we've got lots of baby talk over here. Um, Lying unnecessarily about little things. I have a lot of kids who are frustrated more easily. And then there's a lot more fighting. Siblings are fighting a lot. I mean, they're spending all this time together. Um, some kids are having a hard time concentrating. You've got moody kids. Okay, so and the more that the kids are unable to talk about their worries and their feelings, the more likely they will internalize those feelings, which can lead to all sorts of behavior. So how do we react? Well, it's tempting to try to talk them out of it, to convince them that they're big now, that they're okay, that they should pull it together, or to talk tough when they break the rules, especially come down hard on them so they'll learn. If they're withdrawn, it's actually easy to leave them alone. Um, or we have our own issues where we're struggling to cope as well. So it's sometimes we just want to say, look, I can't deal with this right now. You have to be more patient or more understanding or more independent. But you have probably discovered that that doesn't help. So what can you do? Well, again, one thing we can do is accept their feelings. And when they need more nurturing and connection, we can give that to them. So let's talk about what that might look like for different age kids. So if I'm hearing a lot about potty accidents. I haven't seen it in the comments. But if you have a 3-year-old who's starting to pee in her pants, what do we want to say? We want to say, you're too big to be peeing in your pants, honey. You know how to use the potty. But what could we do instead? We can say, oh, that sneaky pee. It was in a rush to get out of your body. Hey, pee, Lily doesn't want you in her pants. Or for the 4-year-old who might start um, uh, talking and acting like a baby, instead of what we want to say, which is, stop talking like a baby. I can't understand you when you talk that way, right? We feel like I finally made it out of the baby stage and now we've regressed again. But what she's showing us is that she needs to be treated like a baby. She's not feeling so secure. So we might say, come here, my big baby. I need to hold you. My daughter, who's now 22, when she was younger, she used to love to have what we called baby time. And she would climb into my lap and pretend she was a baby and suck on my shirt. And I would stroke her and talk to her, oh, my big baby. And after a few minutes of this, she would fill up and she would get up and run around again. So we can give them what they want and help them get that feeling of connection and closeness and safety that they're really asking for when they do the baby talk. Or I'm hearing a lot about children, 5-year-olds who forget how to get dressed on their own. I need your help. I can't do it myself. That sort of thing. So again, what do we want to say? We want to say, oh, you're a big girl. You know how to get dressed. But what can be more helpful in that moment is to say, come on, let me help you with your shirt. give her a cuddle, or pretend you can't remember where that shirt goes. Does that go on your legs? Where does it go? Help me out here. So you create that connection and that closeness again. If you've got a child who's just crying over nothing and seems to have a short fuse, again, what we want to say is, come on, honey, this isn't such a big deal. Get over it. But what can be more helpful is to accept that feeling. Ugh, that's not what you wanted. Darn. If you have children who are more withdrawn or anxious, it can help to treat them like they're younger. Remember how you used to comfort and reassure them? Do things to take care of them. Create a feeling of safety at home. They may want more physical contact or caretaking, getting them food, helping them with chores. Don't worry, this won't make them more dependent. It will give them a sense of safety so they can come out of themselves. I want to tell you a story about a mom who attended one of my early talks. She has 2-year-old twins and a 4.5-year-old. And she said after the talk, she realized that her kids were regressing from all the stress. One of the 2-year-olds had been an independent dresser, and she had regressed and was saying she couldn't get dressed on her own. There was a lot of limits, a lot of kids popping up at bedtime, needing more attention. So she and her husband decided that they would give them extra warmth and extra cuddles instead of, when the kids were trying to get dressed, instead of telling them you can do this on your own, because they had done it before, they started helping them. And her 4.5-year-old had started pooing in his pants. So they handled that with much more care and understanding. And she said, as they did this, the floodgates opened. The kids started to have so many feelings that they were sharing with their parents around grief, around missing their friends, the babysitter, the park. There was lots more crying, lots more snuggles for a few days, but then they evened out. So it took them a few days, but then the kids were coping and they weren't so regressed. Another example, a mom of a teen told me that he was arguing a lot with her, said, I just want to go out and play basketball with Tommy, the friend. This is ridiculous. Tommy doesn't have coronavirus. There's no point in making me stay inside all day long. You're being overprotective, right? So it's tempting when your teen says something like this to you to lecture to them. No way. How could you even think about going out? Haven't you been watching the news? Anybody can be a carrier, including Tommy, and then you'd be bringing it home and exposing the rest of us in the family. No, you may absolutely not go shoot hoops with Tommy. End of story, right? That's what we want to say. But how could we accept the feeling first before we hold the limit? We might say, so to you, it feels like it's really low risk since Tommy has been quarantining at home. It's true that we're not in a hot spot. And nobody in our family is sick. That's true. It seems unfair to you to be stuck at home. That seems like an overreaction to you. Well, here's the thing. Our government is asking everybody to refrain from even these one-to-one social interactions. It's because of the math of the way the virus spreads. If one person has mild contact with another person who had contact with a few other people, well, it quickly multiplies. Here, let me show you the visual, a visual of how it happens, right? So we can present our point of view once we have acknowledged and accepted how our kids see it. So don't worry, you have time. Don't panic that they're arguing with you. Spend as long as they want to accept their perspective first. When they're ready, you can ask, well, what are some safe ways to get together? What could you and Tommy do? And then you might offer some choices. There's, Skype or FaceTime. Maybe they can go for a bike ride, which is safer. Or you can put the child in charge and ask him, what can you do? What can you think of? You can make them part of the solution. Okay. Let me talk a little bit about siblings who are fighting more than usual. Just let me say that I usually spend about 12 hours on this topic when I give a workshop on sibling fighting and rivalry. So I'm just going to very briefly touch on this topic since I don't have that much time. So there's two things I want to mention. One is when they're actually in the moment fighting, it's what we're tempted to say to them, look, it's normal to annoy each other when you're suddenly spending every hour of the day together. That's what one mom told me she told her kids. And the thing is, this is true, but it's not particularly helpful in the moment because they still feel really annoyed with each other. So then she tried telling them what to do. Look, you should just leave each other alone. You go sit over there. You go to your room. Don't hang out with each other, which she said, only lasted for a few seconds and then they were back at it. So I want to suggest to you that you don't need to play judge and jury. You don't have to tell them what to do, who's right or wrong. The first thing that can be helpful when kids are fighting is for you to listen to each child, right? We're going back to the idea of acknowledging everybody's feelings. They're not listening to each other, but you can be listening to each of them. So you've got two girls fighting over music. You might say to each one, so you're tired of listening to your sister's music. You feel like you've been listening to it for a long time and you need some quiet, right? And then I'll turn to the next child, and you're tired of being told to turn it off. You feel like you can't concentrate if there isn't some music going on. Again, don't rush this step. They might want to elaborate. They might want to tell you more. Give them a turn. Let them know you have more to say. As soon as your sister's finished, I'm going to hear what you have to say next. Sometimes that's all it takes, and sometimes you need to go on and say and sort of describe the problem. Well, one person wants it quiet, and one person needs music. What can we do? We need some ideas. When we throw it out to the kids, we never know what kind of solutions they're going to come up with. Are they going to agree on a playlist? Is one person going to wear headphones? Are they going to choose to go to separate rooms? We don't know what will work for them in that moment. So that's one thing you can do when they're actually in the moment fighting. But the other thing you can do is sort of big picture to reduce the conflict level in the house is to find time to check in and spend some time with each child separately, preferably when you're not rushed for time. I sometimes feel bad even mentioning this because I know parents of young children are so pressed for time that it feels like I don't have an extra 5 or 10 minutes even. But if you think about how draining it is to be around kids who are in conflict and the time that takes to resolve those conflicts, maybe you can turn some of that time into time that you spend with each child. It, 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 uh, it might not happen unless you intentionally build it into your day. It can be really helpful to let the kids know when it's going to be. Because some kids will save up their worries and their questions and their complaints for this time with you. And the little kids might just need that fill up to get your complete and undivided attention, put the phone away, go into a separate room. Sometimes it just means sitting on the floor, they'll crawl in your lap, and they just want to cuddle with you or read a book with you. Whatever, follow their lead, do what they like to do. Okay, so let's go back and say, what if your kids are still just asking or complaining? Young children may need to hear what's going on repeated over and over, right? They ask a lot of questions about, why. So it can be helpful to make a book, a story about their life and about what's been happening. Something that they can help create, and then you can read it to them over and over. The story might go like this. My name is Tabitha. I used to go to Wonderland School with my friend Eloise. Then there was a pandemic, so now we have to stay home. I miss my teacher, Miss Perky, and I miss the tricycles and the climbing structure. Now I play with my mom and dad. I wish I could see my grandma too. I like to play with Play-Doh and make forts, and so on and so on. So your child can help create that story and the drawings for it. And some kids like to read these things over and over. It helps them process what's going on. If your child is constantly asking, why can't we go outside? What do we want to say? We want to say, I've told you already, honey, we can't go outside right now because we have to keep everyone healthy, right? So if your children are asking these questions over and over again, instead of literally answering the question, hear it as a statement of feeling, and you can address the feeling underneath the question. You might say, ugh, this is so frustrating. I wish you could go outside whenever you wanted, right? Don't rush that step. Let them talk to you about it. And then you can ask, well, what should we do while we're waiting to be able to go out? Or if your child's asking, when can I see grandma? Instead of, I told you, we don't know. We have to wait until it's safe to visit. Address the feeling under the question. You miss grandma. You wish you could see her now. What should we do? Should we write her a letter? Should we draw her a picture? If one person is working, I've been talking to couples who are trying to figure out how to manage this. And sometimes one person will be working in the bedroom and the other parent will be watching the kids. And of course, the kids always want to see the parent who's not available, right? So again, you can acknowledge those feelings even though you're not going to let them into the bedroom. You can say, ugh, it's so hard to wait. And then of course, it can be really helpful to give them some information about when They will get to see that other parent. We're going to visit at lunchtime. And you can also give them something to do. Shall we draw a picture for mommy? Do you want to write a note? Little kids, by the way, think it's just amazing when they speak and we capture their words in writing and read it back to them. So if you haven't done this with the young ones, I highly recommend it. Um, should we make up a dance for him? Should we plan a puppet show? Get out your stuffed animals. Okay, so this is a lot about feelings and helping kids with feelings. But what about when we need kids to do things, right? We know that we need them to get their shoes on or sit down for a Zoom class. It's tempting when there's something we want kids to do to tell them directly, put your shoes on, sit down now, the class is starting, right? The problem is that commands create resistance. Now we're working against ourselves because the kids are going to fight against us because they don't want to do what we tell them. This is a principle that's true for all people. Adults as well as children do not like to be told what to do. Imagine if you have a spouse who said to you, "Hey, close the door. And you've got to put away all the clothes on this chair. How am I supposed to sit here?" And you left your shoes in the middle of the floor again. You're supposed to keep them in the closet. How many times do I have to tell you? There's a relationship that needs a little help, a little attention, right? So it's true for us, it's true for our kids, but we're in a dilemma because there's so much we need our kids to do, right? So how can we make it more likely that they will feel cooperative? Well, I have a long list of ideas in my book for little kids, and at the end of this, we have a bibliography for those of you who have the older children. There's another book for the older children, but I just want to touch on a few of these tools right now. My first favorite tool for parents of little kids is to be playful. Um, uh, we can get a lot of traction when we turn something into a game or when we're playful. Now, a lot of parents will say to me, "Ugh, I'm just not the playful type. I don't even know what to do." So let me give you a few ideas of how you can be playful with kids. One is to play pretend. A lot of kids love to play pretend. If you're trying to get them to wash their hands, when my oldest, who's now 29, when he was 2, we had a rule that you had to wash your hands before dinner. And I think at some point he felt like, I've done that already. I'm not interested anymore. And he said he wasn't going to wash his hands. My first thought was, don't wash your hands, don't eat dinner. Pretty simple. And then I thought, wait a second. Tired 2-year-old, hungry 2-year-old, getting into a battle of wills. This could not end well. So I quickly changed tacks and I said, you know what? And I used to do this a lot when I was stalling for time because I thought I have to come up with some idea that will engage him. And so I was trying to think of something. So I often said that first, you know what? And then you have to know he was really into Sesame Street at age 2. I said, I heard that Big Bird is missing from Sesame Street and he's hiding in kids' bathrooms. Should we go take a look? He said, yeah. So we go to the bathroom and we look around. I said, do you see him? No. Well, let's look in the sink. Is he in the sink? No. Put the water on. Maybe he'll come out. See if you can catch him. Not there. We try the soap. Not there. Come back to the water. It's not there either. He's not in the towel. Well, let's go look at the dining room table. He was nowhere to be found, so we decided to eat dinner. Next night, want him to wash his hands again? Guess who we have to look for? And then, after a few nights, we branched out to other characters in Sesame Street, Bert and Ernie and Cookie Monster and the whole gang. And this went on for a long time. And I did wonder at some point, like, when do they just wash their hands without having to make it a game? And as I say, he's 29 now, does it no problem. But when we turn something into a game, it makes it more fun for the kids. It's easier to engage them in something than when we just give them a command. If you're trying to get your kids dressed, you can, as I said before, you can play the incompetent fool. You pick up the pants and you say, where do these go? Are this for your ears? What's this for? Is this a hat? And then they think it's so silly that that you, the all-knowing adult, can't figure out where to put the pants. I sometimes, when I was trying to get my second son out the door, and he was resistant, he just didn't want to, he didn't want to get up and go, I would pretend that I could get the door open. I can't get it to open. This is so frustrating. And he'd say, oh, Mom, I can do it for you. And he'd open the door for me and we'd get out the door that way. Somebody's sharing a great idea about how to get little kids to wash hands by making bubbles. Yeah, please share your ideas in the chat function. One more idea for you for being playful is to make an inanimate object talk. Did they take out the blocks and throw them all over the floor and you're trying to get them to clean up? Instead of harassing them, come on, clean up. You can't take anything else out until you get this cleaned up. We're not having dinner. All those threats that we want to give them. Instead, you can pick up the block bag and make it talk. I'm hungry. Feed me blocks. A green one. That's delicious. Oh, pink. It's disgusting. And then you'll find your kids are suddenly throwing blocks into the bag to see what you're going to say next. I did this with my kids when they were younger, and I have to tell you, the first time I did it, they had so much fun. They said, let's dump the blocks out again and do it again. Okay, so that's being playful. You can also give information. And if you're trying to get your kid to attend Zoom class, instead of saying, come here, sit down, you have to watch your class now, right? That's what you want to say. You can try, your class is about to start. Can you hear how that is information that doesn't actually tell them what to do? They have to take that last step and say, oh yeah, I'm supposed to go over there. And it makes it more likely that they will feel like doing it. Or you can offer them a choice. Do you want to watch in the kitchen, or would you prefer to sit on the couch? Do you want to take a bath with your measuring cups or with the turtles? Now, sometimes people will say to me, but what if your child refuses to sit down for that math class? Well, then you might have to go back to acknowledging feelings. You're not in the mood to sit and do math. And your kid says, yeah, I want to play. And you might say, it's hard to do school when you're not at school. And then what could you do to make it more pleasant or less awful, right? So once we've acknowledged their feelings, we can look for ways to engage their cooperation. And again, what works for one child won't necessarily work for another. So you have to do what's right for your child, for the particular one you have. Okay, I want to make one more comment related to this whole idea of feelings, which is that, we parents have feelings too, and our kids will pick up on them. When the pandemic first started, I was reading a lot of the articles that were being written for parents, and there was a lot of advice to stay calm around your kids. Don't have the news on, don't be thinking about the news, be present and calm with your kids. And while that's great if you can do it, I just think it's not always realistic. What if you can't? What if you don't? Well, I think that the language that we use for ourselves can also be helpful for our kids. So instead of saying, can't you just, leave me alone? This is an important phone call. Or not, instead of saying, what is wrong with you? You're making me so angry. I don't even want to be around you. That's an actual quote from a client that I got. You can acknowledge your own feelings. Use I statements. Those are statements that start with the word I instead of the word you. So you might say, I'm feeling distracted. I'm worried about Aunt Karen. Now they understand what's going on and why you're acting slightly different. Or I'm frustrated. I need to finish writing this email, and that means I need to concentrate instead of talking. So maybe your child will want to help you, and you could say, you could help me by setting the table for dinner, or washing the lettuce for salad, or for your little ones, for drawing me a picture. I've been talking to parents about how do we manage when we have to get something done and we have little ones. And one of the strategies a parent told me was helpful for her was to set up a little desk, quote unquote desk, for her young child, and she gave him office supplies, paper and pencil and so on, and had told him that she was going to work and he was going to work too. So what we want to do, it's tempting to sort of want to erupt and attack a child. What is wrong with you? How many times do I have to tell you to clean up after yourself? Talk about your feelings instead. Say, I feel so frustrated. I need to use the kitchen and the counter is a mess. Can you hear how that is not telling a child what to do, but it certainly gives them an indication of what you would like? Okay, I had promised to pause at the end and take questions and comments and suggestions. So I'm going to do that. I think what we're going to do is take the questions in the chat function. And Angela, if you have already
yeah, that's great. So yes, if people who are listening have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. One of the questions that's come through the chat so far is someone who's wondering about how to handle kids that don't want to bother you while you're working. and may make unsafe or questionable choices when they're trying to do it on their own so that they don't bother you. And the example given was a 7-year-old trying to cut an orange with a knife that was way too big for her because they didn't want to bother the parent who was working.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So this is this is a tough situation because you can't anticipate every little thing that a 7-year-old is going to want to do, right? So if you've had that situation, I might sit down with that 7-year-old and say, if first, I'm so appreciative that you are trying to be so independent and help me so I get my work done, and that's very helpful. So first, I want to describe what this child did and let her know that it's been incredibly helpful for you, so she knows that you appreciate it. And then I would probably say, we need to figure out a system when you need something that's not really right for a 7-year-old to do, like cutting something with a big knife. What could we do? Could we have some sort of system? Can you write a note and put it under the door? Can we have a system so that if I'm in the middle of a conference call, or I can't break away from work right away, that I'll send you a note as soon as I can. We'll have a stopping point. We'll have a check-in point. Like, I would try to create a system with her together. And the key here is not to. I don't think you're going to be able to anticipate everything that she does, but if she understands that, if she's not sure, she probably has a sense of what is okay for her to be doing and what isn't. Like, she shouldn't actually go outside and go down the block and buy the extra milk at the corner store if you're not available. Those sorts of things, that she knows, how am I going to get that done? That you are, even though you're working, that there is some way that she can send you a message or get to you, or maybe there's a stopping point. And see if you can come up with that system together.
That's great. Thanks, Julie. There were several comments, and there were a few of these early on when we first jumped on. People are struggling with teenagers, and particularly kind of power struggles with teenagers, and a lot about screen time with teenagers and how to handle increased desire for screen time with teenagers.
Yes, and I'm hearing a lot. First of all, you're not alone. Everybody is using screens more, especially teenagers. And think about it. This is their only way to stay connected with their friends, which is so important in the teenage years, right? And so parents are telling me that they are torn, because on the one hand, we want them to be connected to the outer world. We want them to be able to stay connected with their friends. And this is often their only way. But on the other hand, we worry when they're on screens, hours and hours and hours at a time. So I have a few thoughts for you to consider. One is, if you do have concerns about your teens being on screens for too long, and if it's a matter of they're not moving their bodies, they're not getting any exercise, then rather than trying to talk to them about how to take away the screen time, let's talk about what your concerns are and how they can meet those concerns. If you're concerned that they're not getting enough exercise, which is what I'm hearing from a lot of people, then let's do some problem solving with them around how to get more physical exercise during the day. So how might that sound? You're going to do a problem solving session with them, and the first step is to acknowledge their feelings and their perspective, right? So I want to acknowledge that in a shelter in place situation, you're going to want to be on using technology even more than usual to stay connected with your friends. And I think that's important, and I recognize that. I'm talking to my child now, right? So let them tell you, yeah, that's the only. And if I get off in the middle of a Zoom party